So for today's Thriller Thursday, we're talking about a book that follows a true crime podcaster who ends up getting herself into a whole heap of trouble. So stick around to see what it's all about. Well, hey friends, Roger here, and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. So today we're talking about a book entitled Night Swim by Megan Goldin. The story follows Rachel Kroll, a popular true crime podcaster. Her podcast, Guilty or Innocent, is known by almost everyone and in the past has focused solely on murder. This season, however, the podcast will be focusing on a different type of crime, rape. So Rachel has just arrived in the small town of Neapolis to cover a rape trial that has divided and polarized the town. The small town local hero and wealthy Goldin boy Scott Blair, an 18-year-old Olympic hopeful swimming star, is accused of raping a 16-year-old girl named Kelly, who is the granddaughter of the town's police chief. In addition to attending the trial and reporting back on the facts, Rachel begins interviewing people on both sides of the case. And as we often see in these types of cases, many of the townspeople blame Kelly for destroying the future of such a promising young man with her accusations, whereas others consider Scott a monster. It was really heart-wrenching to see the effect that the rape had on the girl, whose life will no doubt be forever changed. And to add to the intrigue of the story, Rachel also begins receiving strange letters from someone named Hannah, the sister of a girl named Jenny, who supposedly drowned 25 years prior. In the letters, Hannah pleads with Rachel to investigate her sister's death, claiming that the girl's death was no accident, but was in fact murder. Initially, Rachel has no intention of taking the case because, after all, she receives requests for help all the time from desperate people, and she's quite busy at the moment covering the rape trial. But as the letters become more and more frequent and more intriguing, Rachel, in spite of the fact that almost all her time is being taken up by the polarizing trial, begins to investigate Hannah's case as well. So the story is told through alternating points of view, one being Rachel's and the other being Hannah's, told through the pages of the letters. Now, what's fascinating about these two narratives, the current rape case and the 25-year-old drowning, is that they intersect in the most clever and original of ways. So along with Rachel, we get to solve two compelling mysteries which have a lot more in common than Rachel initially thought. So as she begins digging into Hannah's death, she begins to uncover some of the town's dirty secrets, secrets that certain people in the town wish to remain buried. So typically, I'm not really a fan of courtroom dramas and tend to avoid them, and a good portion of this narrative does take place in the courtroom as we hear the testimony and evidence of everyone and everything related to this case. But I actually found this part of the book to be absolutely gripping and riveting, and this harrowing trial sucked me right in. It was definitely an ugly trial, but these pulse-pounding scenes were so incredibly well written that I felt as though I were there in the courtroom myself. I was impressed by how some people's testimony clearly pointed to rape, whereas the testimony of others created reasonable doubt, with both sides being utterly convincing. I also found these scenes to be especially thought-provoking as they brought to the forefront a lot of ethical issues with these types of trials. It also brought to the forefront the difficulty with these types of trials, as there are rarely witnesses, and this often ends up being his word against hers. I thought that the story also really illustrated in a powerful way how the victim is traumatized over and over again in the witness stand, which was more than a tad difficult to read. Now, let me say that this book is absolutely gut-wrenching and extremely tough to read in places, so it may be especially upsetting for those who are survivors of sexual abuse or those for whom reading about rape is triggering. Because here we see firsthand the repercussions that rape can have on a victim's life, especially the emotional trauma that they endure. So in this story we see empathy for the poor young man whose life is destroyed, whereas the victim ends up being slut-shamed by a good portion of the community. So even after the violent act itself, the victim still has to go through the horrendous trauma of rape kits, of hard-hearted defense attorneys, and of course the loss of reputation and the ruthlessness and harshness of public opinion. It definitely tore my heart into many pieces at times, as well as got my blood boiling. Now, speaking of reputation, I thought it was fascinating how the theme of reputation was at the core of both of these cases, and what happens to people when they become defined by their reputation, and how such a definition of reputation can literally destroy a person. And this fact was illustrated nicely in the current case that Rachel is covering, as it's clear to see that no matter how this court case turns out, there will be no winners, as those involved will no doubt be haunted and traumatized throughout their lives by what occurred, and it may be nearly impossible to move past their new reputation, either of them. We also see the same in Jenny's situation, and Jenny was the sister of Hannah's who supposedly drowned 25 years earlier. So in her situation, she ends up being treated by her community in shocking and heartbreaking ways. So though this was indeed a rough book to read, and indeed certain scenes were especially brutal, it was a powerful and captivating and thought-provoking novel. It was so fast-moving, addictive, and suspenseful. It was an intense book that I simply could not put down, as I desperately turned the pages to find out what really happened to the two young women in our story. And there are certainly plenty of surprises and gripping revelations along the way. I also thought that the dual and parallel storylines worked really well here, and I liked how both of the cases slowly unfurled. Additionally, I thought that the author's skill was really evident here in how both women's stories were told with sensitivity. You know, there are so many hard-hitting themes in this book. There's reputation, haves versus have-nots, justice, injustice, consent, violence, murder, rape, deception, family, assault, ethics, morality, and more. And this is the type of book that you'll think about long after you finish it. At least I know I will. Actually, I finished this a while ago, and I'm still thinking about and pondering this book. So yeah, I ended up giving this book 5 stars. So did you like this video? If so, please click the like button below, as that really helps my channel out. And again, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support, and I will talk to you all in the next video. Roger and out.